All right, let's get started. So, my name is Michael Levin. I head up open source community here at Hardex, focused on Label Studio. I realize in previous webinars I haven't really introduced myself much, and so I'll just do that briefly here, since this is sort of a more informal conversation than previous webinars. So my background is mostly in big tech. I guess you could say. I've led teams of product managers, developer advocates, and developer marketeers at companies like Google, IBM, HTC, Samsung, and Bose, among them. And I was thrilled to join Hardex Labs, focused on Label Studio, because this is, I believe, truly a game-changing product on the bleeding edge of technology in an extremely hot space with a fantastic engineering team behind it. And I know that sounds like a bit of patting us on the back. I'm still fairly new, so I'm still kind of a fan as well as an employee. But enough about me. We're doing bi-weekly videos. This is the latest in our series. I believe this is the fourth video that we've actually had put out there. The first one was a partner webinar with Pachyderm for data versioning, which was really useful. Then we did a couple of webinars wholly focused on tutorials, beginner-friendly tutorials around Label Studio. You can check those out on our YouTube here. And we wanted to introduce a new type of video content. We're still going to be running bi-weekly on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Pacific, GMT -7. But we're occasionally going to be sprinkling in interviews with community members for the purpose of inspiring and informing. One of the things I've noticed as I've been meeting people in the community is, man, we have a great community. There's so many working on really amazing things all around the world. The first person who came to mind was Saraubh from Agami. He is one of the initial people that I interviewed. I'll let you introduce yourself as well. I won't butcher it. But before we get there, I just want to make a brief announcement about our next webinar. So we will be hosting a partner webinar, which will be our second partner webinar, but it's going to live on YouTube now going forward, with Kevin Koh, who is a community engineer, open source engineer at prefect.io. This is going to be a really interesting webinar. They're going to teach us how to use Prefect to normalize data, pre-annotation in Label Studio, and also some really great stuff around their flow product and how Label Studio can be integrated into that for a lot of really, frankly, useful things. That will be on the 26th. We'll be announcing it formally on social with some links where you can actually get an invite and know where to live stream around the end of this week, beginning of next, May 26th, 9 a.m. So keep that in mind. And then after that, we'll be doing another tutorial. I hesitate to say, but I think it will be focused on machine learning integrations, backends, etc. This is something that there's been a lot of interest in from the community, and we just wanted to make sure that we kind of have time and space. The team is really hard working behind the scenes on the next release of the product, as you might imagine. But obviously, this is something that gets brought up a lot. So keep that in mind. That'll be in early June. Okay, so one final note. We are using, as usual, our webinars channel, #webinars, on our community Slack. If you're not in our Slack already, there's a bit.ly at the bottom of your screen here. It's up on all my slides. I'll bring up the slides occasionally. But please join our Slack and head over to the webinars channel and ask any questions that might come up as we're interviewing Saraubh. You can ask questions that are with respect to what he's working on, or questions with respect to his specific Label Studio setup. Part of this is for inspiration. So what he's working on is, to me at least, really inspiring. But then also, we're going to take a peek under the hood of how he uses Label Studio. And the hope is that that's useful. So if either of those things get your brain going and you want to ask some questions, hit up that bit.ly and head over to webinars. All right, so with that said, I'd like to introduce and pass over to you. Well, actually, before I do that, sorry, here's a quick rundown of what we'll be covering. So introductions, talk about Saraubh and his work, a little bit about the Label Studio usage. We may have some questions in between here, but we're definitely going to have questions towards the end, so please ask away as we go along. and then we'll wrap up, do a little bit of housekeeping. We'll have a form where you can leave feedback, etc. And then we'll get you out of here. So without further ado, Saraubh, I'd like you just to kind of take it away and talk a little bit about yourself and what you do at Agami.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. I'll quickly share my screen because I've just put a presentation together. Slightly narcissistic that the first slide is going to be about me.
Not at all. Not at all.
But yeah, so essentially I have sort of a mixed background. I started as an engineer, but after my initial phase in engineering, I left to basically teach school children for some time. I have a very strong belief that like the youth involved into technology or like any of the knowledge industry are like really useful even at like at a grassroots level, where we don't find like the same kind of talent. And I think that belief led me to sort of stay in social impact sector for like some time. I was in education policy before this, but like all throughout, whether it's teaching or my social policy journey, like technology has always been core of my work. And that's exactly what took me to this new space, which is Agami. Um, Very quickly, if I had to summarize Agami, we work towards advancing ideas that serve law and justice. Now, this is a pretty loaded statement, and what does that mean, right? We started from like just understanding how people feel about law and justice space, and there is a sense of paralysis that we have heard from almost everywhere, including like people who make up the system, lawyers, judges, and citizens for sure, right? Who believe that nothing can really change. That's the point that we started from, and we started asking ourselves and like other people, what are those ideas which can, despite all of this paralysis, can actually move. So instead of thinking about where we are stuck, we are more focused and we are energized by the future of what law and justice space can really become. And one of the things that we are like really excited about is how the whole AI, deep learning, natural language processing space can dramatically change law and justice in India for around 1.3 billion people, and like globally for a lot of other countries, right? And that's basically one part of our work. We are a not-for-profit based out of Bangalore. We are a very small team of like 10 people with the ideas of just helping and enabling as many people as we can. Core part of my work is basically enabling a lot of open data generation in India, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. Why it's so much of a problem in terms of law and justice space in India, particularly. But one of the projects which we are doing is Justice Hub. The handle is here, where we enable crowdsourcing contribution for a lot of law and justice data sets. A little bit about just understanding what this beast really is, right? Law and justice in India is a system. Again, almost every country has a law and justice system. In India, it's just massive, right? And it's super complicated. We have Supreme Court, but below that we have like high courts, and then you have subjudicial courts. And and basically one of the characteristics of this entire process is that the number of cases that gets into the judicial system, the rate of inflow is actually higher than the rate of outflow of the cases. So lesser number of cases gets resolved every year when compared to the number of cases gets registered. So there is a accumulation problem there. That is something that we see in law and justice, right? And the other thing that we see is that because of the heterogeneity of the country, lot of state-specific nuances modify laws in a way that if you understand one particular state, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to transfer that knowledge into another state. And the third barrier that comes is not every state is like doing their work only in English, right? So a lot of like state-specific judgments and orders keep on coming, which is in regional language, not just in English text. So that makes up for like a beautiful challenge in terms of natural language processing, because if you try to do anything at scale, one thing is that the characteristic of the entire law and justice, not just in India but just globally, is that most of the data that flows in is text based, It might be captured into PDF, which is one of the reasons why it's not so available freely in India. But like just generally anywhere, law and justice has just too much text to deal with, which is probably like a dream come true for a lot of like not natural language processing, like practitioners. Yeah. Michael, do you have questions? Yeah.
No, I was just laughing at that. A dream come true. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So what really is the challenge, right? Like most of the information, most of the text data in law and justice in India is usually captured, is made available through a e-courts platform system, right? Like it's basically a website where someone can enter basic parameter information and someone can gather a PDF file or some information on that, right? The You can't really do a lot of like big data analysis on that, largely because of this beast called CAPTCHA. It makes it extremely difficult for people to pass through that and gather data which is useful, which is something that they can use to make anything, right? There has been efforts by a lot of different people, and one of the notable ones in Indian context is Indian Kanun, who has been like really a pioneer in making cases and order judgment data freely available to a lot of people. So Indian Kanun is one website from where you can get like a lot of this data, right? And they do provide like some premium services on top of this, on top of on top of the access to these documents, free text search documents. But I think this has been game changer because now a lot of people actually go to Indian Kanun instead of directly coming again for historical documents on the e-courts, right? So more recent judgments, if they need, they come to e-courts. For almost all the larger chunk of information that they require, they would go to Indian Kanun. And of course, there is this entire industry of like providing judgments and orders, the whole for-profit makeup of the ecosystem. So basically that's the data landscape. It's messy. It's very restrictive in the sense that the data is not available in bulk for anyone to do anything very useful with that. But like if you come across that barrier, there's a lot there's a lot that's possible, right? So what can you do if you are able to get hold of that data set, right? Like if you're able to say get like 40,000-50,000 neat, clean, text data on law and judgments in India. And again, there's been it's again a very budding area. Again, natural language processing has been like a very recent has actually like hit the ImageNet level of a disruption hardly like 2 or 3 years back. So this is very recent, and law and justice is one space like which is just too niche and like is budding up in a lot of other countries as well. What you can do is there are several use cases for natural language processing to help process legal text data and make it like available. In terms of like product use cases, there are definitely like chatbots, and there are like search engines that you can make to help lawyers and like citizens. But like talking more technically, I think there are a few problems that Indian text really has that requires that makes NLP almost imperative, right? Like you can't really solve it without applying some of these techniques. You can't really solve information extraction issues without like applying machine learning or deep learning methods. It's just like simply not possible. One, again, because of the heterogeneity, and second, like not because you do not have enough text in a form that's really parsable in that sense. So broadly, like you can do text summarization, which is very useful. So a lot of people need very concise information on what this judgment really is. In India, you can find judgments that can range anything between like 500 to 1,000 pages for one single case, right? And if someone wants to just gather like really important parts of that information, text summarization is useful. Why is it important? Most of the people in India just don't have time or the literacy to go through 1,000 pages, right? That makes law in itself very inaccessible. Similarly, like for contracts and for just like plain simple like legal, just like bare act laws, understanding of that, right? Like a lot of summarization techniques can be applied to that make it more accessible to people. A lot of text generation use cases are there in terms of automating contracts can cost people a lot of money, and that's again like something that you can optimize for businesses for overall growth of the economy, or for citizens who want like a cheaper services, right? So the moment you drive down the cost there, like you are anyways like serving a large number of people there. Some of the parts of the judgment where you have to like write and which are more formal in that sense, like can be generated through text generation. And similarly, like one need that almost a lot of practicing lawyers really have is like, what are the similar cases when I'm dealing with this particular issue? Right now, the way legal searches work, again, like this is something that a lot of for-profit solutions are building on, thanks to natural language processing and like deep learning, is like case similarity. And if I give you a particular context, like what are the other cases which really like align with this particular context and can be used either as precedents or as something as a reference for this particular case. The research really is the key there, which one would be able to solve if you are able to identify similarity and dissimilarity. And again, like arguments which make up bulk of the lawyering work in that sense, right? So that's really useful. But like all of that really starts with one very simple problem, which is like information extraction in itself. So once you are able to get very neat text data, there are some basic use cases that you can start solving for like, for example, named entity recognition, entity disambiguation. You can, for a lot of like complex litigation, there are electronic discoveries that you need to make. And you can do a lot of like question and answering, which can be useful for citizens and providing legal access in that sense. So this is what's possible. Again, like this is not exhaustive, right? Like this is barely touching the surface. I think the potential for it to help citizens just generally is enormous. The field is still growing, and I think like there's a lot of excitement in terms of what NLP can bring to law and justice sector. And yeah, I think like there's a lot that's possible which is not covered in this particular slide. This is what like a typical case really look like, right? And the reason why I put it in there is because if you see here, this 7 by 12, right? 7 by 12 by a human being. If you try to guess what this really is, like this looks like a docket number or probably month and year or some form, right? 7 by 12 is actually a valid legal document name. In Hindi, it's called Satbara, right? Satbara is basically a document on land records, right? If God forbid, in a long judgment, like if you have dates in the form of this and you have 7 by 12, there are a lot of like complexities that you can't solve with just using a regex or a plain simple method of extracting like texts there. So you have to take the context into you have to take the context of this word into consideration, and you have to basically then figure out what this particular word mean, because of this whole heterogeneity, it makes it very complicated for one word to mean the same thing in different contexts, and like sometimes even numbers can almost refer to something unimaginable. And this is what it looks like for a lot of states, right? So what 7 bara or 7 by 12 is for Gujarat would be Pahani for Andhra Pradesh, which is another state in India, right? And if someone, and maybe one research use case is just to figure out like, can we create a document classifier? Again, if there are techniques to do that, but if you try to use very simple like regex on this and try to extract this information, it's very, very complicated. And the second challenge that you hit is like, okay, this is for land use case, but how do you do other use cases where you would have law intersecting with biomedical, where you have law intersecting with technology, right? Building a dictionary and having that approach is very, very limited in law and justice, because one, it's very vast. It intersects with a lot of different other domains. And second, there's just too much text to parse. There are definitely going to be cases where you would not be able to build that dictionary, at least to that sophistication. And that strong type and that strong, very formal way of like representing might not even appear in the document per se. So you have to take a statistical approach. You have to basically go through a machine learning or a deep learning approach with that sense. Again, right? Like even if you get access to that data, what do? Right? In almost all the cases, we know that if you are able to get labeled data, there's nothing like it, right? It's probably one of the biggest pain points at this point, that we do not have enough labeled data. And so what we started spinning off is that we actually started using Label Studio quite early, and we wanted to like create something on top of that to have like users have like controlled and multi-users sort of like access the same platform. We deployed it on Heroku to start labeling projects. So we developed like a layer of user authentication on top of Label Studio, which right now, if you go to Label Studio, is like comes out of the box, which is one of the best features that is something that we have been like wanting for a really long time. Not for a long time actually, because like the length of that is like there, but I think like that's one of my favorite things that has happened on Label Studio, which is like just having like user authentication, because it makes your once you have the label data with you, cleaning it up or like filtering out labels that you don't want, or like actually measuring people's performance in terms of how carefully they are like annotating, because then again it goes back to how you're training your annotators, right? So doing all of those complex stuff like makes it so much easier and neater right now. And again, I hated the interface that we created. Like it just looks so much better after the version 1.0 release. But yeah, that's all I have in terms of like what we are doing, and I'll talk a little bit more. But Michael, do we have any questions?
I have a question, and also before I ask the question, please ask questions. We don't have any from the community yet. I think folks are used to asking technical questions, but I think anything about you and what you're doing at Agami is welcome, as well as Label Studio specific questions. But something you said in the beginning, I wanted to kind of circle back on when you were started to talk about Label Studio. Would you mind elaborating just a little bit about that decision-making process initially? Why did you choose to start using Label Studio and then stick with it?
Yeah. So I think so we did quite a bit of survey in terms of like what are the tools available out there. And we looked at Docano, we looked at like some other tools as well. And while all of them worked, to be very honest, like all the tools worked out of the box. But I think like there was an appeal with Label Studio. I think there are a couple of things that stood out. One, that and it goes beyond just what the product really is. When we saw that there's a host of things that you could do from Label Studio, it just gave us agility. So as an organization, we are like very agile at this moment, and we love experimentation, right? For us to be able to try different stuff became so much easier once Label Studio had like a very easy way of configuring what we wanted to label, right? So that configuration like really stood out to us. Second thing that really stood out to us was just the ease of labeling. I think there was something about it. Maybe it's a human-centered design per se, but I think it just like it just made it so much easier for us to label, and it was just it was just beautiful. I mean, like if I had to summarize it, it was just like very nice on eyes. And annotation is not the best of the things that you would want to spend your time on, right? And if anything alleviates that that problem, like I think that's the tool to go for. So that was there, and I think like again, like I was lucky enough to have a conversation with your team as well, and also learn about like the whole active learning part that was being cooked under the hood, which just completely made sense, right? Like for any other tool that I would have gone, one, I would have to spend like a lot of money on that. Second, like so much of configuration that's available out of the box is something that I just did not find in other tools. So those were the considerations. Yeah.
This is all Really wonderful stuff. I swear I didn't either pay him or threaten him to say some of that stuff, everybody. Honestly, I think, internally, we're very hard on ourselves. We're perfectionists. And I think all the time the team is fighting to try to do better. And it's good to hear some words of encouragement around what did you call it?
Human-centered
design.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and again, anyone can ask questions, but I wanted to switch gears and ask a little question about kind of just taking a step back. What interested you in this space in the first place, law and justice? I mean, looking through those documents, you got to be a particular kind of person to not only do that, but also enjoy it and be enthusiastic about it. And it sounds like, based on what you've described, I mean, it's even complex here with different states in the United States. I can only imagine how incredibly complex and varied and different, and what a big problem this is, an opportunity really to solve a big problem this is. But what sort of gravitated you towards it on a personal or professional level?
Yeah, I think so. So before I was working in law and justice, I've actually been working in social impact sector for really long, and I think if you just look out of your window, what you see is that anyone around you, if they have something in common with you, is that all of you are governed by laws, right? Like that is basically like something that we don't understand, that governs us. And tomorrow, if we don't have like a decent enough understanding of, we are in a lot of trouble, right? Like there's an aura about this particular field which has been protected by institutions and like participants for a very long time. And generally people feel very incompetent when they think about, I have to deal with laws, right? Like even if I can read English, though most of the law is written in English, one could like really buy a simple book and understand it, right? Like it's not more complicated than that. But like the nuances of it, like just makes it like absolutely out of reach with people, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is like almost I think all the legal systems do not like leave you if you do not have understanding about law. So if you by mistake make an error or make a crime, like you are still punished, right? Like things just felt very unbalanced there. Things just felt that a large number of people are they just don't have like a way to sort of balance, or like way to sort of be feel like that law
Fair.
is something that's like fair. Yeah, fairness is like probably the biggest of them. But like if I had to break it, it's basically access to information, right? It's access to like people who would be able to help you when you are in a legal trouble, right? It's access to like verified information in that sense. And for a lot of people who are researchers or who are policymakers, there is just information blackout in that sense, right? The veil is so strong in terms of the information that it had to be pure, right? And that's why, sorry.
No, you go ahead. And that's why.
Yeah, and that's why, and artificial intelligence and natural language processing, one again, right? Like it has so much uses in other spaces, but like I was just not seeing enough happening in this particular space, and also it looked like a very crazy idea, which makes it worth trying. So I started looking for opportunity. So first thing that I figured is that there's a Stanford Codex lab, which has like a lot of work done on like legal informatics. There were a lot of projects done in UK in terms of ICL R&D, who are creating long form NERs for like legal use cases. Most of the innovation in law and natural language processing and AI happens in commercial contexts.
Huh.
Right? When you talk about contract automation, when you talk about like that's really where the innovation is happening. Doesn't mean that it cannot happen in anywhere else. No one is looking in that direction, right? So I think that just made it exciting enough a problem to start attacking.
So we had a question roll in, but before I ask that, because that's switching gears a little bit, I guess I just sort of selfishly want to poke at this a little more. So one of the things that because honestly, this is a bit of a pet thinking project for me over the course of years. I've thought about like machine readable laws, right? That are interpretable perfectly. But the problem is, it seems to me, not that just laws have gotten out of control and they're hard to interpret and that's a problem for everybody. There's incentives to keep it that way. You know, every lawyer and barrister in the world is happy that only they can interpret these things and help you, and you can't do it on your own, right? And I feel like that's inbuilt at every level of law and justice. It's like, well, if I'm the keeper of knowledge in this area, I'm gainfully employed. In fact, I could probably make more money. So you're going up against some pretty powerful, built-in, not conscious, but just like system level incentives to keep things the way they are, to keep them a little inaccessible and bespoke and unique, right, to that particular municipality or whatever. What gives you hope that you won't get just sort of crazy pushback as this becomes more and more viable as you go along, like people clutching pearls and saying, well, we can't do this because for fear of that, you know, fear mongering about how making these things more transparent and accessible would, I don't know, do something bad. Yeah.
You know, and, that's a fair question. And to be very honest, I don't have an answer. Like, but there are things that gives me hope, right? I think courts are an institution that by default give you one thing, right? That they will hear you. If you file a case, you will have your time and judge will hear you, right? Mm-hmm. Most of the information that you have from court is public documents. So the problem with accessibility is more of a mindset shift, that like if we start believing that it can be done, it can be done. The other thing is like lot of AI innovation is going to democratize that, right? Like I think like technology has this. Yeah, I think technology just generally makes a lot of things accessible to people. So I think like one of the key roles that AI probably will have to, and again, I'm just predicting here, but like will have to play in 21st century is just making a lot more people enabled, right? Like,
I love your optimism.
I mean, if it hasn't worked so far, doesn't mean that it won't, right? Like, if we talk about data transparency, right? India has been able to like pass certain like really radical laws, which no one really thought that it would get, right? Like right to information, for example, right? Where you can actually.
So I'm not familiar. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, you can talk about
it. Yeah, right to information is basically an act which basically says that if you're a citizen and you want basically some information from a public office, you write to us and we'll give it to you. That in itself is like superbly powerful, right? Like, and the moment you start having data in terms of like, are certain people being elected in a certain way, are certain people being appointed in a certain way, it shifts the power, right? So as long as I have a very strong trust that as long as we are able to open information and data to a large number of people will figure out how to use it. The balance will get to fairness. The balance will, get there, as long as people have access to information and technology and someone is democratizing that. I don't have to like make use cases for them. People are smart enough to do that. I just need to like lay the groundwork for them. That's it.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so here is the question that came in from Elton Mangani. Thank you very much for submitting a question. Apologies if I got the name wrong. So pretty broad question. What type of data do you mainly see or use? Does Label Studio have all of the requirements you need for the data labeling so far?
So let me actually share my screen at this moment. So
thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. So there are like, I'll talk about like 2 use cases that like we are exploring at this point of time. Mostly Label Studio has like what we really need at this point, right? And I'll just quickly show you one project which is like labeling the sections of law in Indian Constitution. And that basically comes as HTML text to us. Again, we can,
Yeah, just in case we have some complete new people, would you mind just talking through what you're doing?
Oh, yeah. So basically we have set up like projects in Label Studio. And what we are trying to do is we are trying to create a NER model to do named entity recognition in legal texts. One of the things that I'm showing, which is again like a very small part of like what we are intending to do, is basically try to label data. And again, we try to do everything like as much open and as much with collaboration as possible. So one of the things that Label Studio also enables us to do is like do a lot of like controlled crowdsourcing. which means that we can run Label Studio on a cloud server and have 500 people have access to it, log in through their IDs, collect their annotations, and then process them, right? So anyone who wants to contribute through their annotation, that's something that we are able to do via Label Studio at this point. The use case that I am showing you particularly are basically sections of law in Indian texts, which we are trying to get labeled at this point. Again, we are amidst a pandemic right now in India, and it's not really great. So things have really slowed down at this point of time. But I'm just gonna give you a very quick rundown. But yeah, the kind of labels that you can have on in legal text could be anything between case name, where in this, which does not apply in this particular case, but I just made it up for the completion's sake. But you could have a case name because of the kind of so for example, this is a good example where if you see that the case name would be something that will be written below this line. It's usually not easy enough to extract it via a regex or something of that sort, and that's why you'll have to almost extract it by training a model to figure out in which part of the text you usually find the name of the case, right? The citations are usually if a particular case has 3 or 4 sections mentioned, then what are the sections that it has been referred, that basically makes the citation. Instrument is usually, so for example, here section 34 is an instrument. I'm using my keyboard to select instrument, but section 34 is basically a legal instrument of Indian Penal Code, which is basically part of the criminal system there. Similarly, what kind of provisions are provided? Actually, there are a lot that can be labeled based on the text. Provision is basically whether it's a subsection. So I'm sure I have another example, but say section is 234, and then there is a subclause A, or actually this one, right? So the provision would be section A, section B of 439A. So this particular one talks about the special powers that High Court has with regards to bail applications for the convicts, and what High Courts can do. So the provisions really are the subclause A, subclause B. Again, because of the heterogeneity in how states sort of put these texts, it might not even appear in the order or in the way that we see right now. This is just what central government really prescribes at this point in time. So yeah, so the moment we get into the whole realm of understanding the judgment, then you will start facing, then you can basically start labeling text with things like what was the premise of the particular case, what is the reason that the judge delivered, what are the axioms there, there are certain assumed axioms there, so you can start labeling those things, and that's how you can start building some of the use cases. For example, whether how different two arguments are or how similar two particular cases are. So these are the kind of labels that we have, we play around with to make something of that sort happen. The other use case is really a legal chatbot where you would want, you ideally would need question answer pairs, and then try to sort of generate text for a new query. So that's the other one. I am not running that right now because I have basically plugged it in with GPT-2, which is also part of the Label Studio tutorial at this point. But because it's shut down right now, if I try to open it up, my system hangs, so I'm not gonna do that. But yeah, this is what it would look like in some sense. So this is just an example. So just bear with me. Here, someone is basically asking that I have applied for divorce, and there are some complications around, related to the divorce case, and this person has asked advice from a lawyer, and this is the text that lawyer has given, right? So this is a lot of context. Now, the challenge with Indian language is also because even if the text is in English, it's not syntactically neat and clear. So the chatbot use cases has like a very, very different kind of challenge.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So formal legal documents, good syntax, very bad access. Chatbot use cases, very bad syntax, very bad semantics, but like a lot of data out there on forums and things like that. Yeah.
I made the mistake of actually reading some of that text block. Sounds like a really bad marriage. Anyway, look, I think let me check one more time. Yeah, I think that's it. Did you have anything else you wanted to add? I just wanted to say before you do, thank you so much. I mean, you've been very generous. It's super late where Saraubh lives right now, and I mean, I didn't ask him to put together that awesome slide deck. You know, you went the extra mile, made this super easy as the first interview that we're doing. So thank you for your time and for being generous and so open to share what you're working on. I hope that I'm pretty sure it's going to be inspiring to others, hopefully informative as well. So yeah, anything else you'd like to add? And thank you.
No, nothing. I mean, if anyone is interested in having access to that data, who wants to work on this thing, like I'm happy to talk. Like I'm fairly open as a person. I'm always available on Label Studio chat. These days, I've been a little occupied with the whole COVID relief work, but otherwise, like Slack me and I'll be happy to have a conversation.
That is completely understandable. Please stay safe. I know it's crazy out there. Yeah. So last slide I'll put up here. Little bit of info. If you haven't already joined our community Slack, and then here's a feedback form. I'm also going to paste this in the chat there. Really, really would appreciate your feedback. It also talks a little bit about the next webinar. You can register to get reminders about that. As a reminder, in 2 weeks, we will be doing a partner webinar with Prefect.io, open source community engineer, Kevin Coe, who will talk about using Prefect to normalize data before annotation in Label Studio and to do some really cool stuff with their Flow product after annotation as well, and a little bit about a loop there. So anyway, thanks again, Saraubh, and thanks everyone for joining. And we hope to see you on the next webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. Bye.
Thank you.